It's time to read the freaking label. Greetings, digital citizen. I'm Ken Ray, thanking you for joining me for this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. Last week we talked about the state of app tracking transparency. That thing that Apple's introducing soon that'll ask you whether you want to let an app track your activity across all the other apps on your iPhone or iPad. That is one of two big privacy initiatives Apple announced during last year's WWDC. The other one is already out, but it's going to require more attention from us. We'll talk about privacy nutrition labels on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. How often do you read the labels on your food? How often do you read the labels on your medicine? Hopefully you do pay attention to that one, because too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. If you've got food allergies, you're probably very familiar with food labels. I dare say, though, for most of us, they're not the kind of thing we pay a lot of attention to. So to say that Apple has solved a problem with its App Store privacy labels is only partly true. They put the information out there. Well, they've made developers put the information out there. Actually, they're making developers put the information out there, but there is something that we still have to do. We gotta read the freaking label. And that, for us, is step one. I know there were a few qualifiers there. Let's take it step by step. On checklist 217, when we were talking about app tracking transparency, I mentioned the PDF that Apple had posted called A Day in the Life of Your Data. Illustrative and informative, I suggest you check it out. Now here is part of what Apple has to say in that about its privacy labels for its various app stores. With the new App Privacy section, the App Store helps users better understand some of an app's privacy practices. Each app's product page is required to provide users an easy-to-view summary of developers' privacy practices. When Apple announced the labels, it made them sound super simple, like the nutrition labels on food, they said. But when a pack of American cheese says fat 2.5G, and that's 12% DV, okay, you've got the words, but what do they mean? The details, it turns out, are in the details. According to Apple, the details pages include information on the types of data that an app collects, such as photos, location, and contact information. The pages also provide users with additional details about how each kind of information is used by the app developer, including whether it is used for tracking and whether the data is linked to the user. All app developers, including Apple, are required to self-report information regarding their privacy practices. That last part is presenting some problems, but we'll get to that in a bit. Let's dig into some of the details, though. Two types of data with which Apple concerned itself in its privacy label spiel are data linked to you and data used to track you. Apple explains data linked to you, saying data that is listed as linked to you means that that data is collected in a way that is linked to your identity, such as to your account, your device, or your details, for example, your phone number. As for the data used to track you, Apple says that refers to data from an app that is linked with your data collected from other companies' apps, websites, or offline properties, and used for ads or shared with a data broker. Apple says some examples of tracking include an app displaying targeted advertisements based on user data collected from apps and websites owned by other companies, an app sharing device location data or email lists with a data broker, or an app sharing a list of emails, advertising IDs, or other IDs with a third-party advertising network that uses that information to retarget you in other developers' apps. It's the kind of thing ATT should take care of. Now, I can tell you a lot of this stuff does get overwhelming. What I'm sharing with you today is not the barest of bare bones, but it's pretty close. Apple's privacy website apple.com/privacy is a great page with colorful, animated icons talking about how Apple works to protect your privacy in Safari and Maps and Photos and lots of other services that live on Apple devices. At the top of that page is a link to a day in the life of your data. Again, highly recommended. While at the bottom of the page are 2 links to seemingly bottomless wells of information, some of which we will hit later. While Apple announced the privacy labels last summer, it wasn't until the end of 2020 that they started showing up. Apple gave developers a deadline of early December to have their privacy info in. Kind of. A piece from The Verge says Apple told developers last fall that they would have to provide this information by the 8th of December 2020 or risk losing the ability to update their apps. If you wanted to put that more cynically, folks who didn't update their apps would never have to share privacy information, or information about the privacy information they're taking. Not that that would go completely unnoticed. Let's talk first about which apps are covered. It's all of them. The piece from The Verge had Apple saying that the new labels would be required for apps on all of its platforms. That includes iOS, iPadOS, macOS, watchOS, and tvOS, and they will have to be up to date and accurate every time a developer submits a new update. That's true for Apple's pre-installed apps as well, though info on those is a lot harder to find. I actually just assumed that it was true for Apple's pre-installed apps. I mean, Apple had said that it would provide labels for all of its own software. Those were supposed to be online, though, since there would be no place in the App Store for, say, the Messages app. I spent about 10 minutes looking for privacy labels for the Messages app on Apple's site, and I could not find it. For help, I turned to Apple's support app. It took the rep with whom I was chatting half an hour to find what we were looking for. Apple does have a support doc called About Privacy Information on the App Store and the Choices You Have to Control Your Data. About halfway down the page is a section titled Apple Apps and Privacy Information that has clickable links for privacy labels for pre-installed iOS apps, including App Store, Camera, Clock, Health, Messages, Phone, Photos, and Safari. There is also an FAQ covering privacy information for other Apple apps. While every app in the App Store should have privacy labels at some point, a few are conspicuous in their absence. You probably think I'm going to mention Facebook here, and I'm not. Except I just did to say that I wouldn't, which I don't think counts. Okay, since I did bring them up, I will say they were pretty quick to get their privacy label onto the App Store. A piece from CNBC indicates that the amount of data linked to you that Facebook collects is massive. But it's Facebook. What do you expect? For fun today, we'll leave Facebook alone and talk about Google. They have not been as quick with the privacy labels as Facebook. And even your iPhone may let you know that. We've heard that developers won't be able to submit app updates without privacy information. Still, they can submit that information without updates. Late last month, a piece from iDownload blog had Google adding the labels to a number of its iOS apps that hadn't been updated, including Stadia, Translate, Authenticator, Classroom, and a few others. That left out at least a couple of heavyweights, though, like YouTube and Gmail. Now, I said before that your iPhone might clue you into the amount of time Google is taking. Just yesterday, Apple Insider ran a report under the headline, Google's reluctance to add privacy labels to Gmail, other apps, might put users at risk. According to the report, Google has taken so long to update its popular Gmail app for iOS that a new in-app warning informs users that the title is out of date and does not include the latest security features. The piece goes on to say that Gmail is now warning users that the app does not include built-in safeguards and cautions against its use. The app was last updated more than 2 months ago on the 1st of December. The pop-up that comes up advises users you should update this app. The version you're using doesn't include the latest security features to keep you protected. Only continue if you understand this. Now, if you use that app and haven't seen that pop-up, that's because you're already in. Apple Insider says the alert only shows up either when you're setting up the app for the first time or when you're adding a new account. While we can't say for certain why the app hasn't been updated, we do know that the company can update the privacy information without an update to the app, but they can't update the app without offering that information. The way Apple Insider sees it, Google's delayed action is thought to be in response to Apple's new privacy label feature. It's kind of funny, the tech press has actually gone back and forth on that idea. A piece from iDownload blog floated that idea in the first week of January that Google might be holding off on updating apps because it wasn't ready to spill its privacy beans. Then a day or so later, TechCrunch had Google saying it would get the info into the App Store within a week or two. While some of that info has shown up, over a month later, the company seems to still be dragging its heels on some apps. Well, on Gmail for sure. Now, Google has released privacy info or a privacy label for YouTube, and it's kind of alarming. I'm not sure how alarmed we should be, though. Last week, iMore ran a report under the headline, "Here's how much data YouTube collects from you on iOS." And it looks like a lot. The piece had Apple Terminal saying, according to data YouTube provides, it collects a range of user data, such as your location, browsing history, contacts, purchases, and more. I kind of have to wonder, though, whether that's data that YouTube does collect or data YouTube reserves the right to collect. I know it seems strange that YouTube might over-report what it's taking. Here's something less strange but more troubling. There's word that some developers are under-reporting the info that they are pulling off of iPhones. We'll talk more about Apple's self-reporting App Store experiment in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Recent numbers from Canalys say Mac sales grew 16% in 2020. Gartner says Mac sales were up 22%, while IDC says they were up 29%. No, they don't agree on the numbers, but they all agree that the numbers are getting bigger, that more Macs were sold. You know what that means? Lots of new targets for bad guys. Protect your digital self with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for over 20 years. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. Then once you decide to buy for less. You can take a little off your subscription to MacScan 3 with offer code CHECKLIST. Try it first. Watch it kick those tracking cookies to the curb. Then when you're ready to buy for less with offer code CHECKLIST at securemac.com/MacScan. Right. Did I say under-reporting on App Store privacy labels? Sadly, I did. There was a troubling story in the Washington Post a couple of weeks back. Another piece from iDownload blog highlights that one. I mentioned a couple of times that the App Store nutrition labels are self-reported, meaning developers tell Apple what info they're accessing or trying to access. But there are so many apps, and Apple is just one company. And not everybody is totally honest. According to the Post piece, more than half the apps they checked out show misleading information or completely false information regarding info being gleaned. Quoting the Post reporter, I downloaded a de-stressing app called Satisfying Slime Simulator that gets the App Store's highest level label for privacy. Turned out to be the wrong kind of slimy, covertly sending information, including a way to track my iPhone to Facebook, Google, and other companies. As I write this column, the writer continued, Apple still has an inaccurate label for Satisfying Slime, and it's not the only deception. When I spot-checked what a couple dozen apps claim about privacy in the App Store, I found more than a dozen that were either misleading or flat-out inaccurate. While Apple does say that it audits apps, indications are that the company will react if somebody does tip them off to inaccurate privacy labels. And yet, there the apps still are, or at least there they were when that column was written. Well, now what are we supposed to do? Well, one thing we can do is remember the tools that Apple has put in its operating systems and use them. The company points out on one of its many privacy pages, Apple gives you transparency and control over the data you share with apps. Apps may request access to things such as your location, contacts, calendars, or photos. You'll receive a prompt with an explanation the first time a third party wants to use this data, so you can make an informed decision about granting permission. Even if you grant access once, you can always change it later in settings. See, that's the thing that made me wonder whether YouTube is actually grabbing all the information its privacy label said, or maybe just reserving the right to do so at some point. When I read the list of info that YouTube said it was going for, I went to deny it access, specifically my location and my contacts. But when I looked in those settings, YouTube didn't have access to them. Maybe Google is casting as wide a net as possible with its YouTube label, or maybe I told it no on those things a long time ago and that stuck. Either way, if you want to feel more at ease, seeing what apps have access to what in terms of your info, it's never a bad thing to do. You can do it pretty easily, too. Just go to Settings on your device, then scroll through the menus until you get to Privacy. Once there, on an iOS or iPadOS device, you'll find controls for contacts, calendars, reminders, photos, Bluetooth, local network, microphone, speech recognition, camera, health, research, sensor and usage data collection, HomeKit, media and Apple Music, files and folders, and motion and fitness. The list will be different on a Mac or Apple TV, but the next bits are the same. Accessing each of those controls shows you which apps have asked for access to what, with a super convenient toggle for turning that access on or off. So even if you installed an app years ago and forgot what info you let it access, you can block or unblock that access whenever you like. If you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show, for the last show we did. You'll find notes for all of them all the way back to the very first one. And you can listen to each show right there as well. It all starts in one place, securemac.com/checklist. If you like the checklist, could you do us a couple of favors? Review the show wherever you found it, and please tell other people about it. That would be very helpful. If you have a question you would like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.